I'm a 29-year-old guy, and I just had the most humiliating Christmas of my entire life. But honestly, looking back now, I dodged the biggest bullet imaginable. 3 years ago, I met this woman, Aurora, at a mutual friend's birthday party, and I thought she was absolutely stunning, smart, funny, everything I'd been looking for. We hit it off immediately, and within 6 months, she was practically living at my place. Then after 8 months, she officially moved in. Here's where I should have seen the red flags, but love makes you stupid, I guess. I have a decent job as a software engineer. I make around $95,000 a year, which is comfortable for my area. I own a two-bedroom apartment that I bought before we met, and I drive a reliable car that's paid off. Aurora worked part-time at a boutique clothing store, making maybe $1,800 a month if she was lucky. And from the moment she moved in, she contributed absolutely nothing financially. I'm talking zero rent, zero utilities, zero groceries, nothing. At first, I didn't mind because I thought we were building something together, and I figured once she got more stable, we'd balance things out. Whenever I gently brought up the idea of her contributing even just a couple $100 a month for groceries or utilities, she'd flip it around on me. She'd say I was trying to control her, that I was making her feel small, that I was obsessed with money, that a real man wouldn't keep score. She had this way of making me feel like I was the bad guy for even suggesting we split anything. So I just kept paying for everything: the mortgage, the electric, the internet, the groceries, gas for both our cars, because somehow I ended up paying for her car insurance too. I was draining my savings, but I kept telling myself this was temporary, that things would get better, that she loved me, and we were partners. About 5 months ago, I started seriously thinking about proposing. Despite the financial stuff, I loved her. I really did. And I thought marriage would bring us closer and maybe give her the security she needed to step up. I started looking at engagement rings and doing research because I wanted to get her something beautiful, something she'd be proud to show off. I saved up for 2 solid months, skipping lunches at work, canceling my gym membership, not going out with my friends, basically living like a broke college student so I could afford something special. I ended up spending $8,200 on a white gold ring with a 1-carat diamond. Not massive, but definitely respectable and way more than I could comfortably afford. I decided Christmas would be the perfect time because my whole family would be together and Aurora had always gotten along great with them. Or so I thought. My parents were hosting Christmas dinner at their house like they do every year. My sister and her husband were coming, my younger brother, my aunt and uncle, the whole crew. It was going to be this beautiful family moment that we'd all remember forever. Christmas Eve came, and I was a nervous wreck. I had the ring box in my jacket pocket, and I kept checking it every 5 minutes to make sure it was still there. We drove to my parents' house, and everything seemed normal. Aurora was chatting and laughing. She seemed happy and relaxed. Dinner was amazing. My mom went all out with prime rib and all the traditional sides. Everyone was in such a great mood. After dessert, when everyone was sitting around the table full and content, I figured this was my moment. I stood up, and I could feel my heart absolutely pounding in my chest. My hands were shaking as I pulled out the ring box. I got down on one knee right there in front of everyone, and the room went completely silent. Everyone was smiling, and my mom had her hands over her mouth. I looked up at Aurora and started telling her how much I loved her, how I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her, how she made me happier than I'd ever been. I opened the ring box and held it up to her. The smile dropped off her face instantly. She stared at the ring for what felt like forever, and then she looked at me with this expression of pure disgust. She said, "Are you serious right now?" Everyone was still frozen. Nobody knew what was happening. She looked down at the ring again and literally wrinkled her nose like she smelled something rotten. Then she said it, the words I'll never forget as long as I live. "This ring is small and pathetic, just like you." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. My mom gasped. My sister's mouth fell open. My dad half stood up from his chair. Aurora wasn't done, though. She kept going. She told me her friend Jessica got engaged 2 months ago, and her ring was 3 carats, that her boyfriend had class and taste, that I was clearly cheap and didn't value her. She said she couldn't believe I'd embarrass her like this in front of people with such a tiny, sad little ring. I was still kneeling there in shock. I couldn't process what was happening. My brain was trying to catch up with reality. This woman I'd loved and supported for 3 years was destroying me in front of my entire family on Christmas. Then she did something I still can't believe actually happened. She leaned forward and she spat in my face. Actual spit, right in my face in front of my parents, my siblings, everyone. My mom screamed. My dad jumped up and yelled at her to get out. My brother moved toward us, but I held up my hand to stop him. I slowly stood up, pulled out my pocket square, and wiped my face, and I looked her dead in the eye. I said as calmly as I could, "We're done. Get out of my house and out of my life." She laughed, actually laughed like this was all funny to her. She said fine. She'd been meaning to tell me anyway. She told me right there in front of everyone that she'd been seeing her ex-boyfriend Oliver for the past 4 months. She said he was more of a man than I'd ever be, that he knew how to treat a woman, that he didn't nickel and dime her like I did. She said I was boring, cheap, controlling, and that she'd only stayed with me because I had a free place for her to live. Every word was like a knife, and she was smiling while she said it. She grabbed her coat and purse, looked at my mom, and said, "Thanks for dinner," in this sickeningly sweet voice, and walked out the front door. The second the door closed behind her, my mom rushed over to me and hugged me. My sister was crying. My dad was red-faced and furious. I just stood there holding this $8,200 ring that suddenly felt like the stupidest purchase I'd ever made. I drove home alone that night in complete shock. I still couldn't fully process what had just happened. When I got back to my apartment, all of her stuff was still there. Her clothes in the closet, her toiletries in the bathroom, her shoes by the door. I spent the entire night packing everything she owned into garbage bags and boxes. I didn't sleep at all. I just kept packing and packing. Years of her life just stuffed into black trash bags. By 6 a.m. on Christmas morning, I had everything ready. I dragged every single bag and box down to the parking lot and piled it all in the snow next to the guest parking spots. It was freezing cold, maybe 20 degrees, and snow was starting to fall again. I took photos of everything for evidence, sent her a text that her stuff was outside, and she had until noon to pick it up before I donated it all. Then I went back inside and changed the locks on my apartment door. I had new locks installed by 10 a.m. Cost me $200 for the emergency holiday service, but it was worth every penny. Around 11:30 a.m., I heard a car pull up, and when I looked out my window, I saw Aurora getting out of the passenger side of a sleek black car. And who was driving? Oliver, her ex-boyfriend, the guy she'd been cheating on me with. He got out of the car too, and I watched them survey the pile of her belongings sitting in the snow. This is where everything truly started to spiral out of control, and where I realized just how much worse this nightmare was about to get. I stayed at my window watching them. I wasn't about to go down there and give them any satisfaction. Oliver was exactly what I expected, tall guy with that gym bro build, wearing an expensive leather jacket and designer jeans, the kind of dude who thinks money and muscles make him invincible. He was walking around the pile of Aurora's stuff, kicking at boxes, and shaking his head like this was all beneath him. Aurora was frantically trying to figure out what to grab first, going through bags and tossing stuff around, making even more of a mess. I could see her getting increasingly agitated, pointing up at my apartment window and gesturing wildly. Then Oliver started walking toward my building entrance, and I knew this was about to get ugly. I went down to the lobby because I knew if I didn't, he'd start buzzing my apartment or causing a scene in the hallway. When I opened the lobby door, Oliver was standing there with this smug grin on his face, hands in his pockets like he owned the place. He looked me up and down, sizing me up. He told me Aurora needed help carrying her stuff and that I should be a man and help her out. I just stared at him and said her stuff was in the parking lot. She could take what she wanted, and they needed to leave. He didn't like that answer. He took a step closer, getting right in my space, and said maybe I didn't understand the situation. He said Aurora was with him now, that she'd upgraded, and that I needed to show some respect. I could smell his cologne, way too much of it. I stepped to the side and told him again to just take the stuff and go. That's when he made his move. He shoved my shoulder hard, trying to push me back. I stumbled but caught myself, and before I could think, my training from high school wrestling kicked in. When he came at me again, I grabbed his wrist and used his momentum against him, stepping to the side and pulling him forward. Here's the thing about parking lots in winter, they're slippery as hell. Oliver's expensive dress shoes had zero traction, and when I redirected his lunge, his feet went out from under him. He went down hard right into a snowbank that the plows had piled up next to the entrance. He landed on his back and sighed. His leather jacket got packed with snow, and he was yelling. But he wasn't done. He got up furious and charged at me again, swinging wildly. I ducked under his punch, and he slipped again on the ice, this time going face first into the snow. Aurora came running over, shrieking at me like I'd attacked him, calling me every name in the book, threatening to call the police. I just held up my hands and said he came at me first, that I was defending myself, and that they needed to leave my property now. Oliver got up covered in snow and slush, his expensive jacket ruined, his pride even more damaged. He was red-faced and breathing hard, but I could tell he wasn't going to try anything else because he knew he'd embarrassed himself. They both started loading her stuff into his car, throwing bags and boxes into the trunk and back seat. Aurora kept yelling at me the whole time, saying I was pathetic, that I'd regret this, that Oliver was 10 times the man I'd ever be. I just stood there silently until they'd loaded up what they could fit and drove off, leaving probably a third of her stuff still in the parking lot. I thought that was the end of it, but I was so wrong. About 3 hours later, I heard another car pull up, and when I looked out, it was Aurora again, this time alone. She got out and just stood there in the parking lot staring at the remaining pile of her belongings. Then something in her snapped. She started grabbing her stuff and throwing it everywhere. Clothes were flying through the air. Shoes were being hurled at the building. She grabbed a box of kitchen stuff and dumped it all over the parking lot. She was shrieking incoherently. I couldn't make out actual words, just this primal rage sound. She picked up what looked like a framed photo of us together and hurled it at my building. It smashed against the brick wall below my window. Glass shattered everywhere. Other tenants started coming out onto their balconies to see what was happening. Someone yelled at her to calm down. This went on for maybe 10 minutes, her just destroying everything, working herself into a complete frenzy. Then she grabbed a decorative vase, something heavy and ceramic, and she wound up like a baseball pitcher. She threw it directly at my window full force. It didn't reach the 3rd floor, it smashed on the ground below, but the intent was clear. That's when I called the police. I told them my ex-girlfriend was destroying property in my apartment parking lot and had thrown objects at my building. They said they'd send someone right away. Aurora must have heard the sirens because she suddenly stopped her rampage and stood there breathing heavily, surrounded by the disaster she'd created. 2 police officers pulled up and got out of their patrol car. They approached her calmly, asking her name and what was going on. She immediately went into victim mode, telling them I'd thrown her out, that I'd kept all her stuff, that I was abusive and controlling. The officers asked for my side, and I came down with my phone showing them the text from earlier, the photos I'd taken of her stuff neatly piled up before she arrived, the timestamps proving when I'd notified her. I showed them the changed locks receipt and explained about the Christmas incident. One officer was taking notes while the other was trying to calm Aurora down because she was getting increasingly worked up. She kept interrupting, yelling over everyone. The officer asked her to calm down multiple times. Then she made the biggest mistake possible. When one of the officers stepped closer to her to try to get her to stop yelling, she shoved him. Not hard, but any physical contact with a police officer is a terrible idea. Both officers immediately changed their demeanor. They told her she was under arrest for disorderly conduct and resisting an officer. She completely lost it, shrieking that they couldn't arrest her, that she was the victim, that this was all my fault. They cuffed her and walked her to the patrol car while she thrashed and yelled the entire way. The officers told me I should file for a restraining order given her behavior and the destruction of property. They took photos of the scene, got witness statements from neighbors who'd seen the whole thing, and gave me a case number. Then they drove off with Aurora still yelling in the back seat. The next few days were quiet, too quiet honestly. I filed for a restraining order and got a temporary one approved immediately based on the police report and witness statements. I had to go to court for the permanent order hearing, but Aurora didn't even show up, so the judge granted it by default. 5 years with no contact allowed. I thought I was finally free of this nightmare. Then about a week after Aurora's arrest, I got an email at work from an address I didn't recognize. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was Oliver. The email was full of threats, telling me I'd ruined his relationship, that Aurora was struggling because of me, that I needed to drop the restraining order and apologize. He said if I didn't make things right, he'd make sure I regretted it. He went into detail about knowing where I worked, where I lived, where my parents lived. It was clearly threatening and honestly terrifying. I immediately forwarded the email to HR and explained the entire situation. Our company takes threats against employees seriously, especially threats of violence. HR contacted their legal team and asked me if I wanted to file a police report, which I did. But here's where things took an interesting turn. HR's legal team did some digging and found out Oliver worked for a company that had a business relationship with ours. They reached out to Oliver's employer and shared the threatening emails, explaining that one of their employees was making violent threats against our staff. Oliver's company apparently had a zero-tolerance policy for this kind of behavior. Within 48 hours, I got a call from the detective handling my case. He informed me that Oliver's employer had terminated him immediately and that Oliver's company was cooperating fully with the investigation. 2 days after that, my phone rang from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered it. It was Oliver, and he sounded completely different, desperate and panicked. He was practically crying, begging me not to press charges, saying he'd lost his job and couldn't afford a lawyer. He said Aurora had been playing him the entire time, that she'd told him I was abusive and controlling, that she'd played the victim so convincingly he believed every word. He said once she moved in with him after leaving me, he realized she was completely unstable. She'd go through his phone constantly, accuse him of cheating with every woman he talked to, throw screaming fits over nothing. He said she'd maxed out a credit card he'd stupidly given her within 2 weeks, buying designer clothes and expensive dinners with her friends while contributing nothing to rent or bills. He said she was doing the exact same thing to him that she'd done to me, and he finally understood why I'd ended it. He apologized over and over, said he'd been an idiot, that he'd do anything to make this right. I told him I'd think about the charges, but that he needed to stay far away from me and never contact me again. He agreed immediately and hung up. I never heard from him again. For months passed, and life started feeling normal again. I went to therapy to process everything. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my relationship with Aurora. I started going to the gym again and actually enjoying my life. My family was incredibly supportive through everything. My mom called me every few days just to check in. About 6 weeks after everything went down, I adopted a dog from the local shelter, a golden retriever mix I named Max. Having him around helped more than I can explain, coming home to something that was just happy to see me with no drama or manipulation. I even started dating again. Met a woman named Sophia through a friend at work. We'd been seeing each other for about 6 weeks, and things were going really well. Nothing rushed, just healthy and normal. Then on a random Tuesday evening in mid-March, I heard a knock at my door, and when I looked through the peephole, my heart sank. It was Aurora, standing there holding a plate covered in plastic wrap, and she was smiling like nothing had ever happened. I stood there frozen, looking through the peephole at Aurora, holding that plate of cookies with the most unsettling smile on her face. She was dressed nicely, hair done, makeup perfect, like she was going on a first date or something. She knocked again, softer this time, almost gentle. My heart was racing because she was violating the restraining order just by being there, and I knew this could go very wrong very quickly. I pulled out my phone and immediately started recording video through the peephole. I wanted documentation of everything that was about to happen. Max was at my side, a low growl rumbling in his chest because he could sense something was wrong. She knocked a third time and called out in this sickeningly sweet voice that she just wanted to talk, that she'd made me cookies as an apology, that she missed me and wanted to make things right. I didn't open the door. Instead, I called out through it that she needed to leave immediately because she was violating a court order. Her smile faltered for just a second when she realized I wasn't going to open the door. She said she knew about the restraining order, but that she thought if I saw how sorry she was, I'd give her another chance. She said the past few months had been hell for her, that she'd realized what a huge mistake she'd made, that Oliver had kicked her out and I was the love of her life. She was laying it on thick, using that manipulative tone I'd heard so many times before when she wanted something. I told her again to leave or I'd call the police, and that's when I heard another voice from inside my apartment. It was Sophia asking if everything was okay. The second Aurora heard another woman's voice through the door, everything changed. The sweet mask dropped instantly, and her face contorted into pure rage. She started shrieking, demanding to know who was in there, calling me every vile name she could think of. She was pounding on the door now, the plate of cookies still in one hand. She yelled that I'd moved on already, that I was a liar and a cheat, that she knew I'd probably been seeing someone the whole time we were together. The irony was absolutely insane considering she'd been cheating on me for months. I told Sophia to stay back and call 911. Then I positioned myself at the door ready to block it if Aurora tried to force her way in. Max was barking now, protective and alert. Aurora was completely unhinged, kicking at the door, still shrieking. Then I heard the plastic wrap ripping, and I looked through the peephole to see her grabbing cookies off the plate. These weren't normal cookies. They looked rock hard, almost like hockey pucks. She started throwing them at my door, these hard projectiles just smashing against the wood and the frame. Some of them shattered on impact, others bounced off and left dents in the drywall of the hallway. My neighbor across the hall opened his door to see what all the commotion was about, and a cookie flew past his head and slammed into his doorframe. He yelled at Aurora to stop, and she turned on him, shrieking that this was none of his business. He quickly shut his door, and I heard him yelling that he was calling the cops too. Aurora was in a full meltdown now, throwing cookies at my door, at the walls, at the ceiling. She was crying and yelling simultaneously, this guttural sound of pure rage and desperation. She kept yelling that I'd ruined her life, that she'd given me everything, that I was supposed to wait for her. I could hear sirens in the distance getting closer, and so could Aurora. Instead of running or trying to leave, she just kept throwing cookies and shrieking. When the police arrived, two officers came up the stairs and found Aurora in the hallway surrounded by broken cookies and destruction. She had tears and mascara running down her face. Her hair was a mess from how she'd been pulling at it, and she was still holding one cookie in her hand ready to throw. The officers immediately recognized the situation for what it was. They asked her name, and when she told them, one of the officers said he remembered her from the incident 4 months ago. They asked her if she knew she had a restraining order, and she actually said yes, but that she needed to talk to me. One of the officers picked up one of the intact cookies from the ground and actually laughed, making a comment about how it was hard as a rock and asking if she was trying to use baked goods as weapons. Aurora started arguing with them, saying they didn't understand, that I was the problem, that she was the victim here. They asked her calmly to come with them, and she refused. She said she wasn't leaving until she talked to me, that I owed her that much. The officers explained that she was under arrest for violating the restraining order and for disorderly conduct. That's when she tried to pull away from them. She jerked her arm back when one officer reached for her and started backing down the hallway. The officers weren't rough, but they were firm. They told her multiple times to stop resisting and to put her hands behind her back. She was still arguing, still trying to justify why she should be allowed to be there. They eventually got her in handcuffs while she was crying and yelling, walked her down to the patrol car while she protested the entire way. My neighbor came out after they'd left, and we surveyed the damage together. There were cookie pieces and crumbs everywhere, dents in the walls, scuff marks on my door from where she'd been kicking it. Sophia was pretty shaken up inside. She'd never experienced anything like that before. I explained the entire history while we cleaned up the cookies from the hallway, showed her the restraining order paperwork, the police reports from before. She was incredibly understanding, but I could tell she was processing just how crazy the situation was. We spent the rest of the evening just talking, and honestly, it made us closer because she saw me handle a genuinely insane situation calmly and by the book. Max stayed close to both of us the whole night, like he knew we needed the comfort. The legal aftermath took a few months to fully resolve. Aurora was charged with violating the restraining order, disorderly conduct, and they even added destruction of property for the damage to the hallway. She tried to fight the charges, claimed she was having a mental health crisis and shouldn't be held responsible. The judge wasn't having it, especially given her history and the fact that this was her second arrest related to me. She ended up getting 45 days in jail, 18 months probation after that, and she was ordered to pay restitution to both me and my landlord for the repairs to the hallway. The restraining order was extended for another 5 years from that date. I never heard from Aurora again after that. Last I heard through mutual friends, she'd moved to a different state and was working some retail job. Oliver apparently got a new job eventually, but from what I understand, his career never really recovered from getting fired over the threatening emails. As for me, Sophia and I are still together over a year later now. Things are healthy and normal and drama-free. My family absolutely loves her. My mom especially has said multiple times how relieved she is that I found someone stable. We actually spent last Christmas at my parents' house, the same place where everything went down the year before, but this time it was perfect. My mom made the same prime rib dinner, and when we were all sitting around the table after dessert, my dad raised his glass and made a toast about how grateful he was that I'd found someone who truly appreciated me. Sophia squeezed my hand under the table, and I realized just how different my life had become in 1 year. I still have that $8,200 ring sitting in a safe. I've thought about selling it, but part of me wants to hold on to it as a reminder of what I survived and what I learned. The whole experience taught me to trust my instincts about red flags, to value myself enough to not accept financial manipulation, and that sometimes the trash really does take itself out. Life is genuinely good now, and I'm grateful every single day that Aurora showed her true colors before I actually married her. Because if she'd waited until after the wedding to reveal who she really was, I'd probably still be dealing with her in divorce court. Sometimes the worst moments of your life end up being the biggest blessings in disguise, and getting spat on during a Christmas proposal definitely qualifies. Max is curled up at my feet right now as I write this. Sophia's in the kitchen making dinner, and I can honestly say I've never been happier. That's the real revenge, I guess, just living well. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments, drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.